Hello and welcome to Agency Office Hours live Q&A to answer your questions about growing your agency more profitably and more smoothly. I'm Karl Sakas, agency consultant, and here's a preview of the questions that I will be answering coming up today. First, Sean in the UK has a question about scaling. Specifically, how do you find ways to make the frontline delivery team more self-sufficient so that all of their questions don't end up going to the senior team? Then Josh in Indianapolis has a question about lead gen. Specifically, how can you use public speaking to generate leads to grow your agency? Then I have a conversation with Noel in London from our sponsor today, JobRack, specifically talking about how do you hire team members remotely who are a good match for your agency's culture. We'll dig in on that. And our final question today is from Arlene in Minneapolis, specifically about agency pricing models. What are the pros and cons of different pricing models, and how do you find the right model or models for you? If I didn't mention your name, you're welcome to submit a question for a future office hours. We meet every second Tuesday of the month in this particular time slot, 12 to 1 Eastern Time, New York City time. If you're participating in the Q&A, sharing a question, go ahead and when I call on you, be ready to unmute yourself, come on camera. Don't share anything out loud since we are recording that you don't want to become public. And if you're watching live, you'll get the recording within 24 hours. And if you're already watching the recording, well, you have it instantly, albeit with a delay. All right, well, first up, question-wise, we have Sean in the UK. Sean, if you want to come on camera and come on mic, thank you for joining Agency Office Hours today.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. Been following you for a while, so I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. So the question you had submitted is around scaling the agency. And more specifically, what do you do to make the frontline team, the frontline delivery team, more self-sufficient? Elaborate a bit and we'll answer it.
Yeah, so I think we're an established agency. We fluctuate between 16 and 19 staff. We seem to hit a certain ceiling when it comes to revenue, and that always happens when the leadership team, and there's 5 people in the leadership team, get dragged back onto doing project work to help with the workload, and inherently that obviously reduces the ability to be more strategic, higher value, and win the next contract that's going to try and break you beyond that ceiling. So that's kind of and it's happened probably 2 or 3 years in a row, to be honest. Obviously COVID within that, but
it's a tough situation. Well, let's dig in to try to figure out what might be the specific challenge or major challenges behind that, and that'll drive what to do next.
Okay.
So, thinking about this, you mentioned that the 5 members of the leadership team get pulled into things. Whenever something isn't getting done, whether that's by one of the leaders or by any of the team members or by a client or really anyone in life, we can think of a Venn diagram, 3 things: desire, competence, and capacity. For people who use EOS, they have their branded version of that. But desire is, do they want to do it? If there's not a desire to do it, people aren't going to do it. And if there is a desire, they're going to try to figure it out. Then the next is competence. Do people know how to do it, how to do whatever the thing is? And then the final one is capacity. Do people have time to get it done? And that tends to be the biggest gap for a lot of people in executive leadership roles, where they've got the desire, they've got the competence, there's just no capacity, there's no time.
Yeah.
So thinking about when your team tends to pull in executive team members, what seems to be missing? Is it missing on the junior team members? Is it desire, competence, capacity, or more than one?
There's probably a mixture of 2, I think. I mean, the desire is always there from everybody within the team. I think the competency, I wouldn't like to use the word competency because everybody's at a certain skill level, aren't they? It's nothing to do with competency. Everyone can improve. But then what was the other one? Sorry, I forgot.
Oh, and then capacity. Do they have time?
The capacity. Yeah, capacity. I mean, we're maxed out. We've got a schedule now through till January, February, so we know we're maxed out with work. But inherently, that feeds into that financial plan that we've got that we know we can't take work on for the next 2 or 3 months unless we look at an outsourced partner. So
Right. I mean, that may be, there are a few potential pieces there. One consideration would be, as you're optimizing how far out you're booked, if you find, for instance, that you end up booking even further out, if it ends up being like 3, 4, 6 months, usually that's a sign that it's time to raise your rates. Now, in this case, here we are in early November, booking out to, through December, January, February. That's somewhat far out, but it's also not, you're booking a year out. By the way, I'm sure there are plenty of people listening right now who wish they were booked for January and February. But it's still a problem, right? Trying to figure that out. So one thing to look at would be, is it time to raise prices a bit? That would help you afford to hire additional people to help reduce some of the crunch.
That's sorry, Carl. That
Yeah.
was one of the questions. Really, is do you use your own cash reserves, or do you go and get finance to, make that next level higher? That's kind of where we're at as well mentally.
Yeah. So in general, I am not a huge fan of borrowing money to hire specific people, but it can make sense if there is someone who really has the potential to totally change the agency. And usually that's going to be more of a director or executive type level role. For instance, a client in New York mentioned that he kept getting pulled into doing SEO work at his agency. And, he had been doing it back in the day. He had team members who in theory should have been handling it, but he kept getting pulled into it. And so we had been talking about it. And one of the things he wanted to explore was hiring a director of SEO, director of the team. So not only could they be doing the higher level work, they'd also be overseeing the more junior team. And at one point it was, I raised, should he consider hiring a recruiter? And he was like, yeah, but then I'm gonna have to pay a recruiting fee. True. But that was a case where by paying, in his case, say a $35,000 recruiting fee, he could get that key hire in so that he stops getting sucked in, which raises, Sean, thinking about your agency. To what extent have those senior team members or perhaps middle managers, how much time are they spending around coaching, mentoring, and training the more junior team members? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I would probably say we do actually have time allocation for that, and we do try and do at least one day every week, the Friday.
Oh, nice.
Is the ideal, but that's the ideal. So we do address it, and we do, we have apprentices in the business, but obviously that doesn't solve the problem that we're talking about. But yeah, that training program is in there. But yeah, and we are actively engaging with a recruiter at the moment. So
okay, so you're taking a lot of the right steps.
Yeah.
One of the things to consider would be when things pop up with the team, to what extent is it a case where they want the manager's help versus they don't? And I'm writing a new article on this around a concept that we could think of as the 3 A's.
Yeah.
Aware, advise, and actively involved. So the idea here is that you train your team to request this, and you train your managers so that if someone mentions something to them, the manager asks, which of the 3 A's is it? So aware is where the employee is saying, hey, this has happened. I'm just sharing so you are aware of it. I don't need anything further. It's just aware. Mm-hmm. The second category would be advise. That's where the employee is saying, hey, this has happened. I need your advice about what to do. Ideally, they bring some initial ideas, but ultimately they need the manager to share advice. And then the third category is actively involved. That's where the employee says, things are deteriorating. I need your active involvement in solving this.
Okay.
The nice thing about that is oftentimes employees come to you, and I've have this across a lot of clients, where the employee is thinking, I'm just sharing this so they are aware. And then the boss starts giving advice, or the boss jumps in and becomes actively involved. I had that with a client recently where historically she would do a final review before deliverables went out to clients. She had middle managers who were qualified to do that, but there were points where she just couldn't resist, and she was looking at what people were doing and then would have changes. Problem is, the client had shared other information since she, as the owner, had been previously involved. And so she would make changes that actually broke some of the client requests, and then her team had to go back in and fix it. So, as we discussed in a recent call, it would have been easier if she just never looked at all.
That does sound familiar.
Oh no. Okay. One key thing with this is, and this is for everyone listening, I mentioned the 3 A's: aware, advise, actively involved. You can train your team to bring it up. You'll find that they start volunteering. It's like, hey, this is an aware thing. Hey, this is an advise thing. Hey, this is actively involved. As a manager, you always have the option to escalate. So for instance, say someone comes to you and it's like, hey, just making you aware. You can ask some follow-up questions to make sure you understand what's going on. Because if there's something that maybe the employee doesn't know, you can give them that information. Or it might be a case where they want to handle it, they're asking for advice, but that kind of given what's going on, you want to become actively involved. You can have a discussion about that, right? You're always able to escalate. For instance, I was at a conference recently and was speaking with an agency owner who had truly a miserable client. The day-to-day contacts seemed fine, but they had this outside investor who just kept bossing the CEO around, and that led to the agency getting pulled around in a lot of directions. And so in our conversation, their client, the investor, wasn't really a lot of revenue for the agency. Things just weren't working. And so the conversation I had with the agency owner, he said, should I have the account manager terminate the account, or should the owner step in and be the one to do it? And I said, it could go either way. I think ideally the account manager is the one to break the news, because then the client can escalate and complain to the CEO of the agency. But that's also a case where, in the details, it sounded like he thought the client might become abusive. I said, in that case, that is time for you to step in as CEO and deal with this as the owner of the agency. So you always have the option to adjust. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's, I'm thinking of ways we can bring that into the conversation. So yeah.
Yeah, my colleague Kate, for people who are joining live, has shared some links in chat about things like the new hire ramp-up plan, other things like that. One other piece, Sean, to consider is around what is each person's ramp-up plan in their role. For instance, say someone starts as a project coordinator, they want to become a project manager. What do they need to do to move up? Yeah. What do they need to do if they want to move from a strategist to some sort of a director role, or an account manager to become an account director, or it could be different things like that. So my suggestion is, if you can get clear on what each person's role trajectory looks like, go from, say, coordinator to manager to director, something like that.
Yeah.
Both their role and what their individual path is. You give people a clearer picture of where they are going within the agency, and it also makes it less fuzzy about how to move up.
Yeah.
For instance, someone, maybe they're an account coordinator, they want to be an account manager. You're like, okay, well, as an account coordinator, you're initially, say, preparing for the meeting. As the account manager, you're going to set the agenda for the meeting. So it's not just the coordination, it's driving what the meeting is, and you're going to lead the meeting. So maybe part of their ramp up is maybe they lead a section of a meeting.
Yeah.
And then eventually they're leading a whole one with their manager there, and eventually they're doing it on their own.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a lot of work with 16 to 19 people, but if you can dig into the roles, what do they need to do to move up?
Yeah.
You can help them prioritize where to focus to move up, and ultimately get more off the plate for you and your leadership team. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely helps. Yeah.
Before we move over to Josh's question about lead gen, Sean, any specific top priorities or actionables that you're planning to take from here?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're actively engaging with a recruitment company. And I'm sure that Noel might mention this, but some of the salary expectations in our industry are just out of control. They're just for the skill level. So
Yes.
you're trying to bring people back down to earth at the same time. But yeah, the recruitment of the role I think is key for us at the moment, because that'll allow the creative director to be freed up in his role, more strategically and design led.
Yeah.
And just the succession planning, we've already got that in place, to be fair. Much about myself as well, being the innovator and not the MD. So yeah, that's kind of the trajectory at the moment.
All right. Well, Sean, thank you very much for sharing. Let me know how things go, and good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, as we shift over, next up will be Josh, specifically digging in around lead gen from speaking. So Josh, welcome to Agency Office Hours.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, you had asked a question. I'll paraphrase and then we'll dig in on it. You had asked about lead gen, specifically, how can agencies use public speaking to generate leads? If you could elaborate a bit, and then let's answer your question.
Sure. So I have done some speaking in the past. It's been free speaking. And what I am feeling a little stuck on is I feel the lack of a plan that will lead to the results I'm looking for. And I see kind of two paths. We're getting some requests from clients to come in and be a paid speaker for workshops, events, things that are more like private facilitation.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I feel like I almost got burned a little bit by previous speaking engagements and saying, what's the point of driving and going and speaking and then getting zero leads out of it? So I'm trying to understand kind of the two paths between paid speaking and lead generating speaking. And maybe there's a combination path that you have experience with that I'm not seeing yet.
Absolutely. So ultimately, as you're looking to get leads from speaking, you're trying to navigate if there are opportunities that maybe aren't paid or aren't paid as much, but you generate leads. How do you balance that with cases where you're doing a private training for a client where you'll get paid, but you aren't getting any leads? Does that
Right?
things?
Yes.
So good news, and this is true for everyone listening, you can do both. And my view on speaking, by the way, is not just speaking in person and virtual events. You can really broaden that to include lead gen wise, speaking on podcast episodes as well, right?
Okay.
You're on a podcast, you're guest on a podcast, you're speaking, and all that. So, on the maybe looking on the paid side first. So this is clients like, hey, we love the work you're doing, want you to come in. I was speaking with a client about this last fall, where originally they wanted her to come in to one of their annual conferences. This is for employees and their sales team, things like that, to speak about the work the agency was doing in digital marketing. And they were so excited with what she was sharing. They were like, we'd like you to do, I think it was 5 editions of that talk, like do the talk 5 times at the conference. They were very enthusiastic. And so in my conversation with her, it was sort of like, well, okay, how will this help you? And in her case, like your comment about the private trainings, it wasn't going to generate any leads, but it helped position her as someone valuable within her client organization. And there actually was a lead gen potential because it would get her in front of other departments at the company.
Right.
Sort of thing. So there is an indirect piece there. I said, but also, like, is this a destination you want to visit? And it happened to be a destination that was a sort of resort style situation. I said, this is all negotiable. You don't have to do 5 sessions. She was like, maybe do 3. I said, okay, great. You can negotiate that. You can negotiate an additional fee. If this conference is this big, they likely have some free rooms. So maybe you could get an upgraded room, or maybe stay for an extra few days at the organizer's expense, because, often the ratio is like for every 50 room nights booked, you get a free one. I mean, it sounded like this event had hundreds or thousands of people. They had some free rooms to play with. So that was currency that they could give her to make it more worth her while. Potentially say, fly out, bring her family along, kind of thing. It's all negotiable. So in that case, she was getting paid enough and getting other perks that made it worth it. And there was some potential lead gen in terms of getting in front of other parts of the business. Now, for instance, if there had been no lead gen potential, or maybe she wasn't excited about the destination or couldn't bring her family, in that case, she might have pressed for a higher fee to make it worth it, or potentially declined altogether. It's all negotiable, especially when the client is the one requesting it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So what about then on the more lead gen side of things? To your comment about speaking, free speaking, from my perspective, there is nothing wrong with speaking for free as long as there is some sort of value exchange along the way. So for instance, I have a speaking engagement coming up later this week. It's part of my process of doing quarterly fee-waived talks. It's a nonprofit marketing association, right? So it's not a for-profit business. And so the deal I have is that I will speak in exchange for travel expenses rather than my usual speaking fee. It helps them out. It helps me refine a new or an updated version of a particular talk. And I can meet with people while I'm out there, and get some airline miles and things like that. And I'm also going to include a soft promo for my agency PM 101 course, where, maybe not in this case, but, in theory, if you have some sort of an info product that you can promote, you might get potentially more revenue from that than from a speaking fee. So free is okay as long as you're getting something from it. And ultimately, you can then lever that up, right? And I mean, also the audience doesn't know that you're speaking for free. They just know that the organizer sees you as an expert, and there we go. So what's your reaction, Josh, around that so far?
It aligns with things that I'm hearing. I think part of the challenge that I'm looking at is I'm trying to put together a plan so that my team can try to secure these.
Yes.
But the other piece is, this is the common phrase that I've heard. If you try to reach out and they go, well, what's your speaking fee? And so the negotiation of speaking fees is outside of my agency pricing experience. So it feels like I'm pitching a thing that I don't know how to price and negotiate.
Got it. And by the way, you're not alone in that. I think a lot of people sort of stumble into speaking rather than approaching it as, say, selling agency services. I'm sharing a resource in chat. So there's an organization called the NSA, the National Speakers Association. There are chapters all over the US, and there are also sibling organizations outside the US, Canada, Australia, the UK, and so on. So it's the NSA, National Speakers Association, not the one that's surveilling people, the Speakers Association. And so there are a lot of local chapters in major cities. I'm a member of the NSA Carolinas chapter, which is North Carolina, where I live, and South Carolina. They actually have an event series coming up, and most chapters will have some version of this, like a speaker academy. So the idea is that, hey, you want to up-level as a speaker, they've got a curriculum, not just about improving as a speaker, but also improving the business of speaking. That includes boosting your fee, boosting follow-on business, without, blatantly selling from the stage and things like that. So for everyone listening, if you want to up-level your speaking skills, organizations like Toastmasters are great. My parents sent me to Toastmasters back in middle school, whether I wanted it or not. I'm glad they did. And there are some advanced Toastmasters groups to boost your speaking skills, but the NSA, the National Speakers Association, is all about up-leveling the business of speaking. And if the goal is to get paid for speaking or to get some sort of compensation, even if it's not all 100% cash. NSA is a good organization to check out. I see Christine noted great association, picked up a lot of tips on speaking.
Excellent.
So, with that in mind, and my colleague Kate, for people joining live, we also shared some links to additional resources. One piece to consider, Josh, as you're sorting through different speaking engagements, it's all negotiable. The more they want you specifically, the more you can potentially get in the negotiation. For instance, there are some places where it's a mass call for speakers and you apply and you have no idea how it's going to go. For instance, I've spoken at HubSpot's inbound conference several times, still have to apply every time and don't always get accepted. There's not a guarantee. So there are some organizations where the event is so big that it's just, you're going to have to apply and take your chances and don't try to put all your eggs in one basket. There can also be smaller events that may not be quite as picky about the people they bring in. But then again, you may not be in front of thousands or hundreds of people, kind of thing. So you're trying to find a balancing act, sort of thing. And there may be some other things you could do. For instance, say there's an organization that doesn't have a budget for speaking, or maybe they'll cover travel expenses, but that's it. Maybe you notice on their website, they have a video production sponsor. That probably means that they have someone recording each of their events. If this is in person, you could negotiate, for instance, getting the video footage from the event as part of the deal. So it's maybe travel expenses and the video footage. Now, why is that useful? Well, if you want to continue up-leveling in your speaking, you want to have a speaker demo reel, a minute, 2 minutes showing you speaking in different settings, things like that. And you could spend thousands of dollars to get video footage. You might as well get the free video footage. It's a case where it has value to you. The programming organizer doesn't really care. Like if they're going to record it anyway, it's really just you connecting with the video firm to get the hard drive or the Dropbox file or whatever to get the video footage. Sort of, they don't care, but it's useful to them, but it also gives you a bargaining chip. So it's not you doing it totally for free. Does that make sense?
Yeah, excellent.
Josh, with the other places you've looked, can you think of anything else that might be useful? I mentioned, of course, travel expenses, speaking fee, extra hotel night or nights, potentially bringing someone else along. Have you noticed any other things that seem like potential other benefits you could negotiate for?
I think that's part of the challenge I have. I have not traveled to speak more than once. And so it's usually been more local. And so I'm trying to get a frame of reference of what some of those in-kind requests could even look like.
Got it. And certainly, speaking is one. Another could be, there are some conferences where they're like, hey, come speak. You're like, my speaking fee is normally this. And they're like, well, we can't do that. Well, it's, what else might be available? For instance, they might give you a trade show booth. Is that useful to you? You probably would need to bring someone else from your team, and that isn't as useful if you don't have the booth set up and everything already, but it's an option. If you have a book, maybe it's doing a book buy. For instance, I just got one of the proofs back from my next book, Work Less, Earn More, How to Escape the Daily Grind of Agency Ownership. I can do book buys built into future speaking. This will come out in January as part of the deal. So it's not the same as getting it as a speaking fee, but that also gets the book in the hands of every audience member. So there's a lot that's negotiable. I would recommend, and this is true, Josh, for you and others, check out the National Speakers Association for ideas on other things that might be negotiable, and then go from there.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Josh, thank you for joining today, and let me know how it goes. All right, next up, coming up shortly, I'll be answering a question about pricing models, how to find the right pricing model for your agency. But first, we have a Q&A with our sponsor today, Noel Andrews from JobRack at jobrack.eu/Sakas. We have a special promo there, SAKS. Noel, welcome to Agency Office Hours.
Thanks, Carl. Great to be here.
We were talking earlier about what's a potential topic to discuss. And one of the big trends these days is around people hiring remotely. But that often goes disastrously. I had a coworker years ago at one of the agencies where he was just a toxic coworker. And unfortunately, it took a few months before my boss realized that he was a problem. His standard line was, "I've explained that to you already." And it's like, well, wait, if you've explained that already to 5 people and not one of the 5 people understood what you're talking about, who's the common factor here? So unfortunately, he was not a good match. So, what can people do better in their remote hiring to find people who are a really great match for their team culture?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is kind of having real clear intention from the very start. So, lots and lots of people, when they think about remote hiring, they think about freelancers and they think about Upwork or Fiverr and people doing kind of tasks and projects for you. And, from my experience and the clients and the agencies we work with, like real remote hiring success comes, when you focus on team members, because that's what we're trying to build, our businesses around, is having a really solid team. Yeah. And that's not to say that, there isn't a space for freelancers and gig workers and people to do tasks and projects, but actually the core people you want in your business, the client account managers, the actual people doing delivery, whether it's SEO, PPC specialists, designers, developers, you want them as team members. And so for me, setting that intention up front, even before you begin to hire and saying, I'm looking for a team member, it just happens to be that they're remote. Yes. Start there. And that's how that's the first step to success. So actually go out and look for team members.
I like that. I had a client a few years ago who was asking, she had some freelancers. Should she pay the freelancers to come to team meetings as they were brainstorming? I'm like, yeah, you're getting value from it. And ideally, if you have freelancers, you're giving them some budget every month to work on things to help the agency. But I guess, Noel, your point is if you're seeing them as a team member from the start, it's really a more equal or mutual relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often talk about it that, so legally, generally, when you're hiring remotely, they're probably not going to be legal employees, right? If you're hiring remotely, you might, if you're a US-based agency, maybe you are hiring inside North America, but very, very commonly you won't be, because one of the big benefits of hiring remotely is you don't have to hire locally. You can look to other regions of the world where there's a greater availability of talent, really highly skilled people that often come at a lower cost. And it's not about compromising on the skills and the experience you get and the quality, but it's about finding those people from places that maybe got lower living costs that translate into lower salaries. And so, that really kind of means that, so legally they're not employees, but to all other intents and purposes, they kind of are. They feel like one. And that's why I use the word team member. And we don't treat our team members any differently. The agencies that we work with in the US and beyond, they tend not to either. So there's a few things that might be a little bit difficult, or different, I should say. So, providing healthcare is a little bit different if you're around the world. It's dramatically cheaper than doing it in the US, as everywhere in the whole world is, I think, on that one. But so the big thing is legally they might not be employees, but they're team members, and treat them equally as much as possible.
That makes sense. So treating equally, I guess in a sense, that's easier when an agency is 100% remote, right? Because it's like everyone is remote. Certainly you've got time zone pieces and beyond. I had a client on the East Coast of the US that was starting to bring in remote team members. They had a few and they were getting advice on more. And one of the agency owner's concerns was for his new remote team members, they aren't going to get the full benefit of the culture. And I noted in that case, well, they're not going to get the office culture benefit, right, of being in their nicely set up office and things like that, but they're still part of the team culture, right? Culture is there whether someone is physically there or not. What can people do to do a better job at that?
Yeah, so again, it's be intentional about it. So if you think about the kinds of things that you do or might still do or did do when you're in an office, it's things like the serendipitous moments, like Friday afternoon cake in the kitchen, for instance, or celebrating someone's birthday. Or you often find that when you're all in an office together and you're going to a meeting, that few minutes before and after a meeting is where the kind of bit of chit chat happens. That's where people get to know each other. Whereas on a Zoom meeting, unless you're intentional about it, that doesn't typically happen. You're just straight into the agenda. So a couple of things that we do and that we advise is one, make it part of your agenda to get to know people. So we take between 30 to 50% of our team meetings just for getting to know each other with just fun questions like, what are you saving up for right now? What are you excited about? What's an embarrassing accident that you've had? Real kind of, this stuff is not in Traction and EOS, right? But for us, this is what builds our culture out and helps people get to know each other. That means that when they do need to collaborate on the work side of things, they're just 10 steps beyond already. So we do things like that in team meetings. We do afternoon tea on a Friday afternoon. So I'm British, so afternoon tea. And that is 30 minutes. It's completely optional. We tend to get about 70 to 80% of the team come in. And there's only one rule. There's no work chat. It's just chat about random stuff. And it might be, I'm trying to think about things they've chatted about, what's the worst film you've seen recently, how to psychoanalyze your romantic partner. One of the team's a psychologist, and just kind of fun things like that. So we tend to be really intentional about it. We recommend that. And whether it's, doing really effective one-to-ones, they're the kind of things that build culture as well. And remembering people's birthdays. So, we use an online tool called sendwishonline.com, which is super simple. And you can do a group birthday card. Yeah, sendwishonline.com. And it's super simple. And again, everyone kind of contributes to the birthday card. We do birthday cards, we do work anniversary cards. And these are just some of the little things that you can do that build that, culture that you want. And it doesn't matter where they are.
Do you have, this will vary certainly for agencies listed by size. Do you have a director of people or director of culture coordinating that? Or how there's a lot of stuff in here that I'm hearing that some people are like, well, I don't have time for that. Like that doesn't scale. True to an extent, but it's really important. So Noel, how do you handle coordinating all that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I split this into two things. So one, as the owner, I have to lead it, right? And I have to, kind of be doing the doing, if you like. But doing the kind of the nuts and bolts of it, no, I have a EA, an office manager that does this for us. So, she's coordinating afternoon tea. She's coordinating with the team to come up with new ideas for things we can do. She planned out our team retreat, for instance. So you can get help to do this. And a big thing that I like to do is make it self-sustaining. So kind of embed it with the team that we want this kind of culture and we want to do fun things around it. So for them to be coming up with ideas as well. But the agency owner or business owner doesn't need to be doing the nuts and bolts themselves. Just lead from the front, share what you're up to, things like that. And then, get kind of EA, office manager, HR assistant and things like that. Doesn't need to be a particularly senior role. That's kind of just kind of keeping things going.
Sort of someone where part of their job is to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense. And I mean, thinking about, how does this benefit business? Well, people are having fun and they're enjoying being at work. They're more likely to stick around. Clients are going to pick that up too. A lot of agencies have, clause where you can't get hired away by one of the clients. I have to say, from some of the clients I worked with as a PM, a director of client services, I wouldn't want to join the client. Like one of the clients, I was on the phone with my contact one day. I made a joke about something. She laughed and said, thanks, I needed that. We don't laugh much here. Her company was just miserable to work at, but at least as the agency, like I didn't have to be there every day kind of thing. So, it's like clients can pick that up.
Yeah, definitely. We get comments all the time, both from candidates and from our clients about how much fun it is to engage with us. So our entire strategy is to be helpful and friendly. And I spent a couple of years trying to find a more complicated strategy before I realized that actually being helpful and friendly is completely okay. And that's what we do. And that does come across. And that when we hire for our clients, the big thing we're always looking for is energy. So, we capture videos from candidates. We're looking to see, are they awake? Have they got energy? Do they come across well? Because that does come across in how they communicate. It comes across in how, you know, they're supporting kind of your clients and the agency's clients. And as you said, it's great for retention. It's great for team morale. And if you can, you know, as an agency, when they succeed, and we've got loads of really great examples of people doing this, if you can leverage getting higher quality people at a lower cost that are true team members and are really embedded with your existing team as well, then there's a huge amount of kind of excitement that can build off that, you know, growth, longevity, more satisfied clients. And ultimately, if we're all delivering really well, it's fulfillment that drives growth, right? If we're doing a really great job with really great people, the referrals start coming, you know, kind of keep coming in, you know, the testimonials, it's all a lot easier.
Makes sense. Well, you know, I understand you have a special promo for people who are joining today. And by the way, if for anyone who's on live, if you have questions for Noel and JobRack, go ahead and share those in chat. If you have any questions, I'm sure, Noel, you're open to helping with those. So what should people know if they're considering engaging? You know, what next from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I do a lot is kind of remote hiring consultations. So we've got clients that with agencies that are fully remote, and we've got kind of clients that are fully local and are just thinking about, you know, dipping their toe in the water and want to know, well, what should I think about? Where in the world should I look at hiring from? You know, what should I do? So I'm offering a kind of a completely free remote hiring consultation. We'll just have a very kind of casual chat. We'll understand where you're at, and I'll give you some, you know, kind of advice and kind of things to think about around where in the world you can hire. We specialize in Eastern Europe, which is we think it's the sweet spot of remote hiring, but happy to advise kind of on other areas as well. But simply, head to jobrack.eu/Sakas, and you can book in a slot from there.
Awesome. Well, no, thank you very much. I appreciate your sponsoring today on behalf of JobRack. And if anyone else has questions for Noel, check out the link and share in chat if you're on live. So Noel, thank you very much.
No worries, Carl. Thanks a lot.
All right. Our final question today is from Arlene in Minneapolis. She wasn't able to join us live in this time slot, but I'm going to answer the question anyway, because it is one that a lot of people are wondering about, specifically pricing models. What is the right pricing model for your agency, and how do you decide based on the different options? Let's start by looking at what the three options are for agency pricing models. You've got time and materials, or hourly. You've got deliverable-based, or milestone. And finally, you have value-based pricing. Time and materials is ultimately you're charging on an hourly basis for each hour you spend on the client's work. It might be a blended rate, same rate for everyone at the agency, or maybe senior rates. For instance, you know, a client focused on a particular niche. Their more junior people are at $240 an hour. The more mid-level people are at $300 an hour, and the owners are at $500 an hour, which does mean when the project managers are assigning people, they don't stick the owners with all the work because they will burn up the budget really quickly, kind of thing. That also helps in managing client expectations. Oh, well, you could get the owners, but it will cost a lot more. Oh, maybe it's not really, you know, worth that much. So that's time and materials. You know, the upside to that is you are paid for each hour that you spend. The downside is you have to be really specific about time tracking, because if you don't track the time, you're not going to get paid from an invoicing perspective. I was a PM at a time and materials agency, and every week I would be reviewing timesheets, making sure that people submit them. Does it seem to total up to the 40-hour target that we had? Had people logged things as billable that were billable? Did I have to, you know, adjust anything where maybe someone rounded down and they should have rounded up? You know, there's a lot of moving parts. But the upside on time and materials is you are getting paid for everything. The downside, of course, is it doesn't reward you from becoming better and better at the work. You know, if you used to get something done in 4 hours and now you can get it done in half an hour, you aren't getting paid more, even though the client is getting it more quickly, all things considered. So that leads us to deliverable-based or milestone-based pricing. The idea there is you're charging on a milestone or a deliverable basis. This could be true for a project. Say someone is building a website, they pay a certain amount, and they get a website, certain specifications. Deliverable-based also works for retainers. Someone is paying certain amount each month, and there might be certain deliverables that you get, or a general area of what you're focusing on. The upside to deliverable based is that the more efficient you get, in theory, the more profitable you become, because say you're charging $10,000 a month and it used to take this amount of time to get it done, and now you can get it done faster and faster. As long as you're meeting your quality expectations, you're getting paid more to, well, I guess in a sense, you are working less and earning more. The downside to deliverable based is the first time you do something, you don't really know how long it's going to take. You're going to make some guesses about how long it'll take, but you don't know for sure. Something that I'll often recommend is that if an agency is doing something for the very first time, it makes sense to work on an hourly basis as you're figuring it out. And then for future engagements with other clients, then you start doing it on a deliverable basis. If you want to start on a deliverable basis, you need to either roll up the numbers so that it's pretty high to give you a buffer, or potentially be prepared to lose money, on that. For instance, I was a PM on a project years ago where we were building in a particular advanced search feature into the client's intranet site. And as the PM, I was getting estimates from the team about what the numbers looked like. And the feedback basically was, if we think about high, medium, and low, the medium was probably around 40 hours. The low, like if it went really quickly, would be 20 hours. The high, though, if things turn out to be more complicated, instead of 20, 40, it would be 80 hours. So I ended up assuming 80 hours in the proposal as I was supporting our sales team on that, and ended up coming in better. It worked out okay in the end, but there's a bit more pressure if you're not sure what's going to happen. Deliverable based can be a little dicey the first time you do something. And then the third category is value-based pricing, where you are ultimately charging clients based on the value they're getting. It could be an actual royalty where you're getting a percentage of their sales. It could be more of a value anchoring where you're identifying roughly what they might make. For instance, the client agrees they're going to bring in $1 million. And so if you charge them $100,000, 10% of that, that's a fraction of the money they're going to make. It's all negotiable. Now, a lot of agencies feel pressure to move toward value-based pricing, and it is great in theory, but a lot of agencies struggle to make it work. If you're considering value-based pricing, I recommend the Blair Enns book, Pricing Creativity. Was one of the advanced reviewers for that when that came out several years ago. And oh, there we go. I see we have a show and tell. Thank you, Sean. We have, my blurb was something along the lines of, this will be the most expensive book you ever buy. It's like a couple $100. But if you dare to follow the advice, it will make you 6 or 7 figures. Value-based pricing has tons of potential. But as a starting point, and if you're listening today as you're trying to navigate this, consider getting things right with either time and materials or deliverable based first. What do I mean? Well, spoke with a client where they were charging $125 an hour. And based on what they were doing, I said, ideally, that's more like $150 or $180. And the owner's feedback was, well, our clients would never pay that. Maybe. Certainly your existing clients, if they're used to paying one price and you get it up to market rate, they may not be thrilled about paying the increase. One option is to do my portfolio approach to pricing, where you identify who gets a higher versus medium versus lower increase, that kind of thing. So maybe say you're at 125 an hour and you want to get to 200. Maybe you say you keep the old rate for 3 months and then they'd go up to 150. And then maybe at some future point, it's up to 180. So they're not quite at 200, but they're going up either way. This is often a problem with legacy clients where you've had the same client for years, maybe your longest term client. They're used to paying some sort of a low rate. The key is to lever that up over time, give them notice and move that up. So that's an opportunity to boost your profit margins within your existing pricing model, rather than having to jump to a totally new model. And you can also optimize that within deliverable-based or milestone-based as pricing model, where ultimately you're raising prices there. Now, rather than charging on a per hour basis, it's more about charging on a deliverable basis. So you could say, for instance, to a client, hey, you are currently at $8,000 a month. And, we've worked with you for a while. We enjoy helping. I know, you're happy with the results we're getting. As a heads up, new clients, rather than an 8, they are typically more like 12 to 16,000. But, we value your loyalty. We're willing to lock you in at 8 for, and it might be, say, 3 months or a few months. And then rather than jumping immediately to 16, we would go to 10, and then maybe 6 months later, it would go up to 12. So they have some advance notice. Now, that's not going to work on every client. Sometimes they don't want to pay any more money. In that case, you have to weigh, do you give them as big of an increase or potentially something smaller? It's also a reminder about the stronger your sales pipeline, the more confident you can be in making decisions for the future of your business. So the power of business development either way. Kate, if you could share my Shopify blog article about price increases, that would be helpful. I see a question, Jose Antonio, you mentioned, how frequent or recommendable is it to use value-based pricing? A few clients have mentioned they wanted to pay for results. That's sort of it depends in terms of how often to do value-based. Some of it depends on the nature of the work you're doing. For instance, if you are doing branding work for a client, it's hard to tie that directly to performance. On the other hand, if you're running pay-per-click ads, you can pretty closely track the performance of whether things are working or not. If we're looking, say, at SEO, it could get a bit fuzzier, though there are different ways to track. If you're doing email marketing, for instance, that there's a lot of trackability. A key thing with this is, do you and the client agree with the attribution? For instance, if you say you're driving along the highway and you're seeing, the lawyer billboard or something like that, is someone calling the lawyer because they saw the billboard or because they searched for a lawyer and they recognized one of the names as the person who always has the billboard? In that case, it's really a multi-touch attribution. So to your question, Jose Antonio, it does make sense to explore value-based pricing. I'm not sure I would shift the entire agency to 100% value-based pricing, but I would evaluate it for at least 1 or 2 clients to get started. And you can use the Blair Enns book, Pricing Creativity, to help structure things as you get started. So that would be my recommendation there. Thinking through this, so of course you're probably wondering which is the right pricing model for you. You can use more than one. For instance, most agencies aren't 100% value-based. They're maybe partly value-based, and then they're doing some other things. It can be hard to do both hourly and milestone on a regular basis, but there are solutions for that. For instance, I do custom consulting projects as a bucket of hours, whereas I do executive coaching as a milestone amount. There's an initial amount in month 1, and then there's an ongoing amount for future months after that. Now, if you're doing milestone based, you just have to manage scope, right? If someone sends me 10 questions in one day, I'm going to have to do some triage, right? I can't answer every single question all at once, that kind of thing. So you need to find the right model for you. If you're here live, Kate from my team has shared my link to articles about pricing models and other things, and links to various other things. If you're watching the recording, if you go into the video description, we have links to some of the top articles as well. So that wraps up agency office hours for this month. We'll be back next month. Like I said, every second Tuesday. You can register for December 2022, and you can also register now for any of the events in 2023 coming up every month, except for when I'm off for my sabbatical in mid-2023 for my 10-year business anniversary. So you can book things then. I look forward to seeing you at the next agency office hours. If you have a question you'd like to submit, go ahead and include that when you RSVP, and then Kate and I will give you a heads up if you were selected. So thanks, everyone, and good luck out there.